Hello and welcome to the breeding track of this fall epic conference. We have an amazing panel here. I called this the Short Tail Summit because it really is the summit. We've got fantastic breeders with a wealth of experience. First, I've got Rich Crowley, who's the author of A Passionate Journey with Short-Tailed Pythons, available on Amazon, and from him directly. I've got Kara from bloodpythons.com, Kara Norris, and we've got Dan Wakefield from Genesis Pythons, all three of them joining us today. How are y'all doing? Welcome.
Doing well.
Thanks for having us.
We're good. Thanks.
Well, this is a passion I share with you guys, short-tailed pythons, commonly known as blood pythons or Sumatrans or or Borneos. Kara, why don't you start by telling us what are the main differences between those three types?
Okay, so the main differences between the three, they are different species, first and foremost. So geographic distribution is going to be key. Borneos are the only of the three species that occur in Borneo. Sumatran short-tailed pythons, which are Python curtis, occur only in Sumatra. And then blood pythons have the widest distribution of the three. So they are in Thailand, they're in Malaysia, they're in Indonesia, Sumatra, some of the outlying islands like the Bangka Islands, a lot of different localities with blood pythons. Blood pythons are Python brongersmai. Again, Sumatran short-tailed pythons are Python curtis, and Borneo pythons are Python breitensteni. And blood pythons are the only ones that are red. Sumatran short-tails are typically the only ones that achieve that really deep black coloration, although they do come in a few other color phases. And then your Borneos are kind of a wide range of creams and browns and oranges and peaches and different colors. So that's in a pine nutshell. Those are kind of your big differences.
That's great.
Yeah.
Rich, anything to add to that? And how does locality play into this?
Ooh, good question. So Kara did a great summary on that one. I think they're the only oddball out there is more recently discovered Burma shorttail with those Python jacktio. But we won't talk about that one because that one's not in captivity and probably doesn't even exist anymore. But there is a lot of confusion, obviously, on the different species. So I think it's really important to understand they are separate species. They are characteristically unique in many ways if you know what you're looking for. So that's a great point. But that being said, there are some differences even with localities. So we've seen this over the years as the original shorties, as I like to call them, came in from captive, from wild caught collected animals. So we've seen that even with the island of Borneo, where the Borneos are endemic to, there's a wide range of different colors and pattern appearances that kind of relate to specific geographic sources. There is an oddball out there within the Borneos, and it's probably the only known locality of Borneo, which is the Sarawak, which is a montane variety that comes from dead center of the island of Borneo, and it typically comes on the more political Indonesian side of Borneo. But the blood pythons have some, regional variances that, when you look at their distribution, is pretty widespread from all the way up into Malaysia and Thailand. It's down into Sumatra and the islands. You'll see a lot of variations there, and they have their own variations. They could be yellow, they could be brown, they could be red, and then of course many of the popular morphs that we see today originated mostly within the blood python complex, and ivories and piebald and stuff like that we're starting to see more and more selectively bred. But you've got the Bangka Islands, which tend to be a little bit of a smaller variant of the mainland Sumatra, and some of the Malaysian animals were bigger as well. You've got Toba, you've got Rio. There's a couple other islands, and locality details are a little spotty because the original collectors are not always upfront and honest about where their collection points are. And then Sumatra, which splits the bloods from the short tails by a mountain range. They typically will see some uniformly dark animals from that area, but there are the orange heads, which are somewhat arguably could be separate species, much like the Sarawak is. But there's still a lot to talk about as far as regional and island-specific animals that quite frankly, it's untapped. So anybody looking for a doctoral program, there's a theme for you.
Awesome.
Please.
Well, Dan, what is it that really drew you to these animals? And you've raised other type of snakes before.
Mm-hmm.
What is it that drew you to the short tails?
So before I worked with any pythons, back in, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but in the late 90s, National Geographic had a special on Dave and Tracy Barker called A Passion for Pythons.
Mm-hmm.
And I watched that. There were a couple of animals in that just really hit me, because I think that show might have been the first time I'd really seen good examples of them. One of them was their jungle carpet python that they featured on that show. And then the other one was a T-positive albino blood python that just blew me away. And I was just thought to myself, I would love to own one of those one day. I ended up in the early 2000s, I bred ball pythons for 10 years. And so that was kind of my initial foray into breeding pythons. And I always wanted to keep a blood python and get into that, but the space that I was in just wasn't ideal for it previously. And I just always remember that video. And then I had the Reptiles magazine with Dave and Tracy's T-positive on the cover. I think I still have that issue. Yeah. And it just, there was something about him. And I think it was the, like, a lot of you have talked about it, the kind of big snake personality and feel, but in a smaller package, not to mention the colors. And there was always something about that red that just kind of spoke to me. And then when I was kind of growing on Instagram a little bit, and then starting to follow more people in the blood community, connected with Kara, connected with Nick, of course, and then Rich, and just was falling in love all over again, I think. And so that was just plunged me into it afresh, I would say.
That's great. There is something about the colors. I have a T-positive, and it's one of my things I go open when I need to be refreshed and remember why I'm doing the hobby, you know?
There's something about watching the development from baby to adult that has never been equaled with any other reptile species I've kept. And then even how they change from day to day. And one day you're like, you're still a really nice looking snake. And the next day it's like, where did you come from? This is incredible.
Yeah. Kara, what about you? What started your journey on this?
Oh boy. So I'm in year 25 now of keeping blood and short-tail pythons. And I blame Tracy Barker. Because my first trip to VPI, she put a T-positive albino blood python in my face. And that was it. At the time, I was really into like locality boas and all kinds of stuff. And so just from that moment on, it's been an obsession with red snakes. Had the opportunity to work for Nerd for 10 years. And so that gave me a lot of, I think, access to, wild caught animals and being able to shape bloodlines and just really influence what my vision for my collection was going to look like. They're just a big, wonderful puzzle that will take a lifetime to unravel, I think, and put all the pieces into place. And, kind of like what Daniel was saying about watching colors develop from baby to adult, now do that for 2 decades and see the way entire populations of bloodlines develop and where you can stack up certain animals in a pedigree and not only produce red snakes, but produce red snakes that consistently produce red snakes. And that's a very difficult thing to achieve with this species. So homozygosity is, it's tough to stack up, and you can fly too close to the sun. But
meaning there is there's a certain amount of line breeding that is detrimental to the health of the animal.
I'm not even going to say line breeding detrimental to the health, but I think you can make a snake that is too red. Because and then things maybe start to go wrong where maybe they're not intended to carry that much pigmentation, and it has an impact of I've seen some quirky things over the years that make me wonder. But yeah, it's an obsession.
The old, we knew we could, but did we stop to ask, should we?
Oh, well, and there's the difference. Every pairing I do is, should I do this? And what's the purpose? And what will this accomplish? Never do unintentional pairings. So, but that's Rich, a soapbox I'll stay off for now.
Yeah. Rich, in terms of locality, this is very much, I think boa keepers is very much similar to boa species in terms of, having one locality, like when you were talking about Bank Island, I think you were saying, in this, having a locality in the center, sort of like Centralian pythons, carpets in the middle of Australia, separated by mountain ranges. Do they have different personalities and different quirks about them that you can say from one to another, or are they enough? Are they cousins, or are they kissing cousins? If you know what I mean.
It's interesting. I don't think we've really completely defined like what's the standard inheritable personality or trait with a lot of them. I think you can argue that Sumatran blacks are like more on the laid back spectrum than any of the other shorties, and then Borneos and Bloods are kind of like the next step. But it's I think we've seen it, and Kara, correct me if I'm wrong with your observations, but I think we've seen that there is a level of inheritance from the parents to the offspring. Gentle parents make more often gentle offspring. Mm-hmm. And I think for us as, breeders and just in general keepers, we're looking to domesticate animals ultimately. I mean, whether we call it that or not, our selective breeding is forcing some form of domestication into it. And what is appealing to us is not always just the eye candy, but it's also the inherent behaviors of the animals. And, we've learned over time that that's also a condition that you can have influence over. I mean, we know that there's tricks that some of us have learned over time to start the babies off in a good way, where when people pick them up later, that they find that they're very tractable, very laid back. They're not replicants of that old myth that they're all, bloody killers, and I think that's a big part of, trying to dispel the myths, is that we've really excelled in the decades that since this all started, and I've been at it since like the early mid 90s. And I'm going to tell you, back then it was a whole different world than it is today, at least within the short tails, especially. But locality, I don't see locality necessarily driving, kind of get back to the locality driving personality so much. And I think that's only because when we do have sort of a bias towards that, there's maybe a locality that's a little bit friskier than others. It's probably because they're only closer to the original imports, and they haven't been quite selectively bred out to be more tolerant in captivity.
Dan, what are they aggressive? Let's use that word, since that's the one that everyone says when they do the myth. Are they aggressive?
I have never yet met an aggressive blood python. Granted, my experience is much more limited. I will say that in my small collection of, I think with the babies, we're closer to 30 animals right now. But in my small collection, they range from some of the calmest animals that I've ever worked with, bar none, to what I would call a little more high strung and a little bit more vocal about, I don't really want you to pick me up right now. My adults almost never strike at me, unless I'm opening the tub on feeding night, because they're very excited about that. So there's a range there for sure. But I don't have any, and I'm sure Kara and Rich can speak to range of personalities, but personally, I don't have any that I would consider to be aggressive. I definitely do have some that I would not hand to a stranger, and trust them to do well with it, because these animals tend to stiffen up a little bit and hiss and basically act like they don't really want to be picked up. But like I said, I've got some that are just some of the calmest animals that I've ever worked with.
Kara, when you open a tub or an enclosure and you move towards them, you can see them breathing really quickly. It's like they're getting ready for something. They just don't know what. What is that behavior, and what does it tell us?
Well, okay, so first we have to look at the physiology of these snakes. They have an incredibly large primary lung. It's about 65% the length of their body. So they've got a big inner tube in there that's basically inflating and deflating. And of course, that is going to be obvious, in their kind of posture as they are anticipating whatever's going to come next. So some of what you're seeing is just unavoidable. It's why people are always like, oh, why is my blood python hissing at me? Well, it's not. The snake has a big inner tube in it. It's like got a big air compressor in there, and it's going to make noise when you compress that lung, you squeeze that lung. It doesn't have a choice but to make some noise. So you have to understand, like, how are these snakes put together in the first place? How are they designed? Then you look at kind of their, we use the word aggressive. Blood pythons, and really I think most snakes are reactive. It's input output. They are reacting to whatever input we are giving them. And typically when you open a tub, the blood is probably figuring, okay, am I getting fed? Am I getting, some sort of interaction? And then whatever comes next is going to depend on what other stimuli are present in that scenario. If they smell rodents, their next move is going to be a feeding response. And they've already kicked into that instinctive mode before we've ever even opened the enclosure. If there's no other presence of something, that's going to elicit a feeding response, then they're going to be more curious. And I think we're just seeing heavy respiration because of the way they're built.
Yeah, it's almost like it serves a purpose to oxygenate their muscles or something and get them. It just seems like, and it's true from the hatchlings all the way to the adults.
Oh, yeah.
I sort of sometimes think of them like I never want to have venomous myself. But I think of them like, the kind of gaboon viper I can keep,
Yes.
Rich, talk about how they act in the wild. They're probably the least arboreal of any snake ever, right?
Yeah, I think we could probably establish that. Their heavy bodiness doesn't work to their advantage. And, unlike like boa constrictors, which also kind of have a fairly heavy body structure, at least the boas have a long tail to help with anchoring. And they call them shorties or short-tailed pythons for a reason. I mean, from the vent to the end of their tail is such a little nub. And, when we talk about vocalizations, I figured if short tails were dogs, they would be just barking and yapping and wagging their tail when they see you. I mean, they get that kind of interactive excitement. They don't have a tail, so that to speak of too much. Yeah. But, it's more found, or I think we see more often that they're not only are they terrestrial, they can, in some cases, especially with the Borneos, they could be more fossorial in some ways.
What does that mean?
So fossorial is where they're really subterranean to some extent. And it's not like they're digging a hole and hiding in it. But they occupy burrows that have been vacated by, probably the prey that they, consumed. And it gives them an ample amount of protection and cover because they are not a fast or swift moving predator. They sit, they wait, food comes around, and then they got to go figure out where to go safely to secure themselves so that they don't get eaten from something else. And a lot of times that's just to, jam themselves into a vacated log or a burrow. And, now that sadly most of the Indonesian archipelago is filled with palm plantations on Borneo and Sumatra and Malaysia and such, it's very convenient for them to hide under the palm leaves themselves and in the litter there. And I think they've demonstrated a great sort of success living in that environment, feeding off an increase in rodent prey. But that's, you go back, more, before man, they had to find some way to, secure themselves safely, especially the smaller ones. Once they get bigger, there's not too many things you're going to mess around with a 6 or 7 foot blood python. That's, upwards of 30 plus pounds. But certainly younger ones, subadults, have to find some cover, and the burrows work out really good for that. And I think that goes a big part of their natural tendency is to lay under things or lay in an environment where they're jammed up, feeling secure that they're covered on all sides.
Dan, how does that lend itself to the enclosures we should, knowing that, what kind of enclosures should we put them in, and what have you had the most success with?
So I have followed suit with a lot of people who have been mentors to me and gone with some pretty big rack systems, big tubs for the adults, and giving them ways to feel secure in those tubs. So even though it's big enough so that they can kind of stretch out and move around if they want to, but like Rich said, enabling them to feel like secure. And I can't tell you how many times Kara has told me, make sure that they can feel like, they can be snug, or they can feel like they're hiding and nothing can, get at them. And so whether that's, a hide box that they can kind of squeeze into and feel secure, or even, just having crumpled up paper that they can go under and feel like they're hiding under leaf litter, however they feel that way. But you just find that they just act more comfortably, I think, when they have that retreat to go back to and just feel like they've got a handle on things.
Not unlike ball pythons, right? I mean, in terms of wanting to feel secure, sometimes ball pythons want to touch all the sides of the enclosure, or at least 2 or 3 sides. And ball pythons have also been known to use the disused rodent burrows.
And termite mounds.
Right.
Rich, the way we have treated these animals as a culture hasn't always been the best, I'm told. Just to put it mildly, it's my understanding that for a long time, in the last century, they were used in the boot trade. Is that true?
Well, I think they still are in large part. So
really?
When we look, when we look at the leather trade, and leather is basically just animal skin. It doesn't have to fall into our Western conventions of cows, eat leather, but they're used for. I mean, actually, snakes worldwide are often consumed as bush meat. They're collected, in some cases, farmed specifically for their skins for a number of luxury-related items. And, reticulated pythons and blood pythons especially tend to have a very supple, larger expanse of skin that is actually suitable for use in things for like handbags and boots and such. And we've seen, and that's been documented for quite a long time, that's an active, viable industry that continues to the point where even some Western luxury manufacturers have actually supported farming local in these areas to further continue that resource. It's a brutal thing to see firsthand how they're harvested and how they're unfortunately skinned. And for at least for some small measure, back when many of us were actually starting out with the imports, it felt like we were at least saving a few along the way. I think the good news is much of the commercialization and economic value of these snakes actually help bolster a little bit of animals being saved for the pet trade. Has its own drawbacks, and that's probably for a different discussion. But we see it certainly now that we have them in captivity, they're strictly for pets. I mean, that's the good news, right?
Kara, anything to add to that? Is in some of the pet trade, getting an import or a wild caught specimen is really kind of detrimental to the hobby in some cases, or detrimental to their population in the wild. What's the situation here with blood pythons and shorttails?
It's not detrimental to their population in the wild. There are a lot of blood pythons out there. Lots of them are imported as farm hatch babies, but there's a big learning curve with a wild caught snake compared to a good captive bred animal. Blood pythons can be very difficult to acclimate. They tend to come in with like heavy lungworm infestations. They can be tough to get started feeding. Females may not reproduce for multiple years after being imported. There's just a big learning curve, and it's high risk. So it's kind of more of the risk reward for the keeper. I think something else to keep in mind is that, when we look at imports, there's an active culture of blood python keepers in their native range. Like, they know what these snakes are. The chances of getting something really new and unique out of the wild is rare. Those animals are typically offered to a select few buyers first for high dollar before they would ever even hit kind of the general public. So is it worth doing? Not necessarily, compared to, I think, the quality of stock that is well established in captivity.
Especially for people who are, new and not, like working at Nerd. I'm sure that's rather routine to be able to rescue or be able to bring in an import and be able to treat it. You've got great vets, but most of us just don't have vets that are well versed enough to be able to handle that kind of condition on import.
Yeah, it's I don't think the juice is worth the squeeze on that one when it comes to blood pythons.
Well said. Well said. Dan, it occurs to me that a lot of people watching this are going to have experience with ball pythons, with colubrids, with boas. Let's compare and contrast the short tails with those more commonly kept species.
Yeah. So, my experience between the two, one of the first differences that comes to mind with blood pythons is the copious amounts of liquid urine that they produce. And, a ball python could, do its business in the corner and have some, urates and poop and whatever. And it's almost like it stays confined. And not that obviously you want to leave it there, long term, but it's not as big of a catastrophe when a blood python, as you all know, urinates. It's there's so much liquid that comes out. And so what it entails is there's a lot more maintenance required than for a ball python. And while they, if you're new watching this, blood python might defecate once every couple of months, or maybe sometimes longer than that in some cases. But the liquid that they produce is something else, and can be multiple times a week. And so I think you have to be more vigilant with that to keep pristine conditions in the cage. And so that just becomes something you've got to be aware of when you go into, this is not like just getting a bigger version of a ball python and, if I just put it in a bigger tub and put it in the same rack, then everything will be exactly the same. Typically also you're keeping them at lower temperatures. The hot spot is lower, and the humidity requirements are more exact. And so there's some differences there just on the basic requirements of them. And one of the reasons I had never kept them previously when I was keeping ball pythons is because my room was not optimized well enough to be able to just keep everything where it needed to be. Ball pythons are more forgiving with more variation. And I think they come from a place where the high temperatures are higher and the low temperatures are lower. And so they can survive some more variation. And blood pythons, you need to be more, as Kara always says, measure. measure and measure and measure and keep things more consistent. But Kara, what would you add to that? Because I know that I'm
You hit a lot of the key points there. I think something that we have to keep in mind with the volume of liquid urate that blood pythons will put out is a lot of keepers mess up by cramming them into smaller enclosures and then thinking they can get away with spot cleaning. You can't. And that is where, again, back to that big lung that we were talking about, you have a snake that is sitting there and exposed to these, heavy ammonia fumes. If you're not being vigilant with cleaning, and that's where blood pythons kind of got this reputation of being really prone to respiratory infections. No, they do not thrive well, as any animal would not thrive well in a dirty cage. And you have to stay on top of things because due to that big lung, once they do have some kind of respiratory funk set up shop, it is very difficult for them to kick it. It's very difficult for them to get over it. And blood pythons are not as forgiving, as some of the things like ball pythons. I think you can get away with being more lax with husbandry. Not that I would ever condone that or recommend it, but a blood python, you're going to get in trouble pretty quick with that. So that's what I would add.
When we're talking about the size of the defecation, here's a microphone, a Shure SM7.
I'm not sure it's big enough.
Yeah. It's like if you're listening to this,
Yes.
if you're listening to this as an audio podcast, think Coke can.
Yes.
Or urate's as big as this fishing weight, and there's.
And then if I, just to help people, like somebody thinking about getting into blood pythons, take, I keep my adults in the ARS 8514 rack. So you've got this great big tub, and I've got a couple layers of paper on the bottom, and just imagine the entire thing being soaked in urine. Like that's the amount of liquid we're talking about. It's not a little corner that's wet, and you're like, just, okay, I can leave that for a little bit. No, like you got to get it as soon as you see it.
Mm-hmm.
If you're keeping something like this in a 6x2x2, something like that, you definitely want to seal the bottom with silicone, because it's wreckage.
Yes. And have a good shop vac. You need a good wet dry vac.
That's a great one. That's a great. I hadn't thought of that.
Oh, I'll send you a link to a really good one.
Awesome. I have made what I think to be a mistake, but you tell me. I started keeping them on cocoa, and which I think they seem to like. They like to burrow in it. They like to get down in it. But as a keeper, it tends to make me miss the urine because it gets all soaked up by the cocoa, and I miss the cleaning that I need to do sometimes with them on cocoa. What do you all think of that, Rich?
Well, that's a great point. It's actually, we've talked about this with the rise in the bioactive movement, bioactive enclosures, and everybody wants to have these naturalistic looking enclosures, and they're like, oh, what would be great to put a big, beautiful blood python in there, until they realize that, every time they have a movement, urine or, standard defecation, it's like a hazmat situation.
Yeah.
I always tell folks, I was like, you can do it, but it's extremely high maintenance and you have to plan accordingly. And one of those is the fact that you just got to use your nose. Yes. You got to be in there inspecting the animal daily. As soon as they have that situation, whether it's urine or regular just poop, you have to remove it. You have to replace it. And it's a little tough when you're talking about, Daniel mentioned great about the 8514, which is a great little over 2 by 3 foot enclosure. And they urinate a lot. Then they often, throw their water bowl in to add to the mix, which is always a pleasant one. So you have to look at this as a sustainable, if you do this thing right, you can have this animal for 25, 30 years. I mean, I got a whole section of my collection. It's all the geriatric shorttails that are well over their 20s. And think about how many cleanings you're going to do over the lifetime. And, be merciful to yourself and plan accordingly. So, paper is great. I will offer mulch, which I love. I mean, I love the cocoa and I love cypress. It looks great, smells great until they mess it. And then you've got this copious amount of wood product that if you got a large collection, you almost need your own section of landfill to get rid of it. the paper may not be aesthetic in appearances, but it is definitely easy and sanitary to replace. So it's kind of a balance. You need to look at it. And I actually find that if I really want to show off and I have company coming over, I'll put the animals on the cocoa.
Yeah.
I'll do that for a week or two. Then I get sick of it and I go back to the sterile paper and go back and forth. But you'll also find that some animals need that. You talk about the use of the cocoa. Sometimes juvenile animals need that additional security and that sense of comfort of being buried under their substrate just to get them to feed regularly. And it also helps, with the exception of Dan, that we're all in the Midwest. So Kara and I, deal with, the brutal winters of the Midwest area where ambient, humidity could be 12%, 15%. So we obviously need to elevate. Sometimes the wood works really well during those drier times. So
easier to keep it humid, right? Easier to keep the humidity up.
Yeah. Yeah. Paper doesn't absorb the water like the wood products do. And I think, for keepers, it could be you adapt and change. And this is a key takeaway for anybody is there's no single recipe that works all the time for all snakes. Adapt and manipulate. And that might mean you change things up throughout the year and makes it a little bit more fun as well.
Carol, what kind of seasonality are they accustomed to?
Well, before I hop into that, I do want to address the kind of the cocoa. We have over 200 blood pythons right now, and except for babies, all of ours are on Reptichip. They're on cocoa husk, and the way that it has worked for us is the soiled cocoa then goes out to our compost pile, goes into our garden. Garden vegetables go into the rodent racks that feed our rodents, that feed the snakes, and also the chickens, and the chicken eggs feed the rats. And so we've been able to establish this little self-contained system. If it were not for having that garden, I don't know that we could make it work. But mulch your cocoa husk because it works great for that. It's a great mulch.
Matter of fact, it's used as a landscaping material.
Yeah, absolutely, it is. It's slightly acidic too, so vegetables love it. I've had some state fair winning vegetables as a result of adding it to our family garden. So
one of the largest rodent breeders in the country. In Georgia, has their facility out in the middle of a big field, and they use the waste for the farming.
It's amazing.
Yeah, because there's a lot of waste there too.
Oh yeah.
Dan, why should I get one? Why should I get a short tail, and why shouldn't I?
That's a great question. I mean, as I've really gotten into them, I've really considered them to be more of an intermediate species, not a beginner. And it's not because some of them aren't puppy dog, gentle animals. It's not because they're dangerous animals to be around. I think it's simply kind of like Rich and Kara said, knowing what you're getting into and knowing the responsibility it's going to take, knowing it's not something that you can just get and look at and pop in once a week to see how it's doing. Like it's going to be more time intensive. If you're looking at keeping multiple animals, it's going to multiply how much time you're spending with them. So I think it's a good thing to, you see a crazy red blood python and you think, man, I want to get one of those. Pause and listen to something like this with people who have varying amounts of experience keeping them, and consider, what the responsibility level is going to be like with animals like this. But I wouldn't want to dissuade anyone from trying because of how rewarding they can be. I think that I love their personalities and the range of personalities that they have. Like I mentioned already, getting a baby blood python from a known lineage or pedigree where you've got confidence that it's going to turn out to be a stunner, and watching that thing develop from this little thing that's like, might be kind of maroon, kind of brown with some yellows in there and stuff, and watching this thing just grow and flower into this miracle of nature, and how vibrant and how beautiful they can be. It's breathtaking. It really is. And it just makes me excited to to see, the future generations. And I'm like a constant stalker on Kara's Instagram page, waiting for the post to come out and see, the development or the new babies and stuff. So
there are laws against that, Dan.
Well,
Right. Yeah. Yikes.
Yeah. So, Rich, pretty much the same question. Why should I, and what should give me pause?
So I think it goes with just about anything, right? You got to be fully aware of what you're getting yourself into. So staying informed, doing the homework, getting the right information, partnering or even following people who have been doing it successfully. There's so many different points of appreciation with these animals that I think is amazing. I go from what Kara and Dan do with just sharing the images of the beauty that these animals have. So why would you want to do it? Well, you want to do it because it's beautiful, and you got about 6 to 8 years of their continued color development for blood pythons. You see them from the baby as they go through that onto genetic change. It's just fascinating to watch, and they get better with age. Many species of reptiles kind of lose their luster and their color from juvenile to adult. And these guys are complete opposite. These are like fine wine. The longer they sit, the better they get. And the more, I would say, the more disciplined keepers who really impart good care and good patience with the interactions with the animals will be greatly rewarded with a phenomenally laid back, very stress-free animal that is fun to interact with. I mean, there's no doubt about it. When you've got, my most engaging snakes are, 20 plus years old that I've been caring for, and they're like freaking lap snakes. They just chill out. They're big and, chunky and well muscled, but they're just laid back. Conversely, you can get the opposite, if you mistreat them. And that's the biggest problem, is that people just assume that once these animals are bad, they can never go back to being, laid back or be conditioned. And I've proven that wrong. It just takes time and patience. And I think for the average keeper, especially newbies, that's not a good thing to get into. You got to work with maybe earlier starts with other species to learn and practice properly. And then you can move into this, because the mistakes are a little bit more permanent and long-term with short tails than they are with other snakes like ball pythons.
I don't find this, every sort of reptile species comes with its own subreddit in life. There's like a culture around every species and community around every species. My experience has been that with short tails, it's not gatekeeping at all. There's a lot of gatekeeping in some other species, green tree python, but there's a lot of gatekeeping in some species where, everyone's trying to talk people out of it. But what I'm hearing here from you all is that maybe this is a middle ground animal, an intermediate animal that, as long as you know what you're in for, can be very rewarding. And what I suggest also, if as a co-hobby with this, photography, and just talking with Dan before the show, if you need to follow Genesis Pythons on Instagram, in addition to rich.crowley.reptiles, in addition to @bloodpythons, Dan has a gift with photography, and it's if you want to see what we're talking about the kind of changes that happen to an animal over time, look at his Instagram feed and just take it in, and then you'll know that part of it, why the visual appeal is so amazing.
Can I comment on that quick, Craig?
Sure.
Well, so I think just a couple of things, and kind of going back to the like, should you or shouldn't you get a blood python? I think a common misconception is if I buy something labeled blood python, it's automatically going to turn into a vibrant red animal. You have no idea what the lineage is. So if you have a blood python that ends up as a kind of brown adult, that can happen because of the lineage that it came from. So that's one of the things, and that's why, Kara says, look, see pictures of the parents, the grandparents, if you can, as many generations back as you can, to see, are these animals actually going to turn out into vibrant animals? It depends, so there's that. But then one of the things that I was noticing as I was getting into blood pythons was that there were people that I knew had really gorgeous blood pythons, but they were taking pictures of them in rooms where there's yellow incandescent light, and they looked brown. And so I was just like,
see a lot of hands go up, guilty.
Yes,
Guilty.
yes.
And so I really, one of the things that I love to do, and I was doing it with field herping and wildlife photography, was I wanted to show people what these animals actually looked like in the best light, no pun intended, possible. So it really got me like experimenting, with what's the best possible lighting scenario for getting a great shot where the color of these animals actually is accurate and, is not, muted or with anything, weird reflections or anything. And you can do it with artificial light, but it's got to be very white light. If it's yellow, if fluorescent lights kind of trend kind of green in their hue, and so that can kind of throw off and make them look like more blue or any stuff like that. So if you're going to use artificial light, it needs to be big light, so a big light source. It needs to be very white and very even. If it's a small light source, you get glare. Glare hides the color. My absolute favorite light source is outside on a completely overcast day, because then you get the full spectrum coming from the sun, but it's softened. Clouds are like the giant softbox in the sky, if you know anything about light and modifiers, and it's even, it's soft, and because it's full spectrum, you get all of those colors reflecting into the camera. And a lot of my shots on my Instagram page are take the tub outside, overcast day, cell phone picture, no editing.
Wow.
And that is in my opinion, some of the best way to get the most accurate colors possible. The more overcast, the better.
It's such the variability in photos that you see on Morph Market, for example, is such that they'll say martyr line, and then you'll look at it and go, you look at all these animals that say martyr line, and you'll go, well, I don't know what a martyr line is, because it's difficult to see. That's a great point. Anything we need to discuss more about genetics? We didn't go into the morphology of all the different morphs that are available for bloods. There's even some for Borneos, I understand. And we mentioned 3 phenotypes in the Sumatran. We mentioned them all. We got the orange head, the chrome head, and the black head is what I'm familiar with.
Right.
How deep does it go, Kara, in terms of the morphs?
With blood pythons, there's an incredible smorgasbord of morphs out there now. It gets better every year. Everything from golden eyes to pieds to T positive and T negative albinos, every stripe you could ever possibly want, hypomelanistic, piebald, if I haven't mentioned those yet. Flowers and batiks and just so many different variations. And there really is something for everyone. I personally I don't tend to chase the morphs. Line bred reds are my jam. But if there's a pattern or a variation on a blood python that you think you want to see, it's probably out there and you just may not know about it yet. So they're fantastic.
Love it. Every time I go to Tinley to, one of the nation's largest reptile show, I'll see some new morph that I never heard of.
Yeah.
Especially if you go by somebody like Juggernaut Reptiles.
Mhm.
And, they brought a leucistic 2 years ago. Last year they had some morphs. I still don't remember their names. There's a deep pool if you want to swim in it.
Yes.
Good way of putting it.
Yeah. I feel like we would be remiss in not at least talking about Nick when it comes to morphs. The blood python community lost. We probably lost our brightest star, I would say, this last May when Nick Bottini unfortunately made the choice to end his life in a mental health crisis. And the work that was done at Cold Blooded Earth, which was he and his wife Kendra's company, everything that he accomplished with Golden Eyes, with Slacklines, with 007s and Magpies, and just all of the variations that he had worked into. I will hands down say that Nick had the best Golden Eyes and T-positive Golden Eyes that herpetoculture has ever seen. I'm pretty sure we all three have those in our collections as foundational animals. And just if you want to see a legacy of quality, check out Cold Blooded Earth, go to their Facebook page, they're in the process of winding down their collection. Like this is it. Get them while you can, because you want to talk about just someone who made such a lasting, indelible imprint and impact on the blooded short-tail python community. It was Nick Bottini, and I think we're all still trying to wrap our brains around it.
Yeah.
So
fitting tribute. Thank you.
And I'm definitely like such a mentor to others. And you talk about the lack of gatekeeping. I mean, he was an open book. You ask him a question and he was asking me, can I call you to answer your question? In the midst of, him going and cleaning his whole collection. But the animals that I have from him are just cherished animals, and he will never be forgotten.
In terms of mental health, I find this species to be really good for my mental health, by the way. You can't be anxious and hold one. You won't be anxious and hold one. You slow down to their pace. You see them breathe and slow the breathe. When you first pick them up, they're going to be kind of huffy and breathing, and then they slow and you slow. Great tribute there to Nick. Well, we are about out of time. I just really want to thank you all for coming on here and doing this.
Yeah.
I also want to remind everybody, here it is. I do this every chance I get.
Awesome book.
A passionate journey with short-tailed pythons. You can get it on Amazon, or you can get an autographed one directly from Rich.
Yes. Get that autograph.
Get it from Rich.
And read about the passion statement from Nick Bottini, who is in the introduction, as well as Kara and others. So this is a community that supports each other, and I think this Kara bringing up Nick, he was such a shining star, and we were going to miss his contributions because he was just starting, in my book, on just decades of inspiration. So
that's great.
We're still dealing with it.
Thank you all very much. This has been the epic session on short-tailed pythons. Now what I think you should do is go to epic.live so you can pick your next session, which probably starts in about 5 minutes. So thank you all. Appreciate you all being here, and thank all of you for watching. I hope we gave you the full picture of what these animals require and what they provide. Thanks again for everybody, and we'll see you all. Bye-bye.